Tonight, Israel sends tanks into Rafah and shuts the two main routes for getting aid into Gaza. Part of targeted strikes and a limited operation, Israel says. So could this escalation destroy any chance of a ceasefire? Tonight, I'll hear two stories of loss, Israeli and Palestinian. Both families still have loved ones inside the Strip. Both families are pushing for a deal. I'll ask a spokesperson for the Israeli government what it will take to end the war. And we'll be talking about a dual security threat.
Putin.
That's as Vladimir Putin is sworn in for 6 more years, with no sign he'll deviate from his strategy of conflict abroad and crackdown at home. And as Russia's ally denies being behind a cyber attack on the Ministry of Defense, why is the West so scared of China? Plus, a detailed account of that sexual encounter with Donald Trump given in court by adult film star Stormy Daniels. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. Imagine being one of the more than 1 million people sheltering in Rafah. Food is scarce, and there's an ever-looming threat of an Israeli invasion. You pick up leaflets warning you to move to a so-called humanitarian safe zone before troops move in. You begin to pack up your life. But then, outside, you hear celebrations after Hamas announced it had accepted a ceasefire deal. Well, we now know that agreement never really happened. Instead, Israel sent tanks into Rafah and seized control of the crossing, effectively choking off the supply of humanitarian aid. Tonight, we hear from a Palestinian family worried about the fate of their loved ones inside Gaza's southern city. And I'll speak to a protester in Tel Aviv who's been pushing the government there to accept the ceasefire proposal to free the hostages. All that in a moment. But we begin tonight with a former president who's running to return to the White House, and the adult film star who's giving evidence in his criminal trial. Today, in a court in New York, Stormy Daniels described her alleged one-night stand with Donald Trump, an encounter Mr. Trump has described as 100% made up. Our US correspondent James Matthews has been following the evidence, and he joins us now live. And James, Stormy Daniels, we've been waiting for this moment. There was a lot of detail, some of it explicit, some of it quite excruciating.
Yeah, those would be the words, Yalda. The 13th witness in this case so far, and by some distance, the standout in terms of detail, box office appeal, I suppose. Donald Trump knew this day was coming, one that I presume he was dreading, given the detail that she had and was prepared to reveal about their encounter in 2006. That's when she met him at a celebrity golf tournament in Lake Tahoe. And the story she told face-to-face with the former president inside that courtroom number 1530 is that he invited her to dinner. She went to his hotel suite, a penthouse 3 times the size of her apartment. He was dressed in satin pajamas. She said to him, well, where did you get Hugh Hefner's pajamas? Go and change. He did. He put on a shirt and trousers. They had dinner. He kept interrupting her. She didn't like it. At one stage, he pulled out a magazine and she suggested that he should be spanked, to use her word, with the magazine. He gave her eyes that said, well, I dare you. And then he duly turned round and she spanked him with this rolled up magazine on the butt, as she said in court. She then went to use the bathroom on this night in this hotel room. She came out to find Donald Trump now in t-shirt and boxer shorts, posing, as she put it. She said she blacked out, they had sex, and then they partied. He said to her, his parting words, let's get together again, honey bunch. She said that she was shaking and felt bewildered. They did meet a few times after that. He had floated the idea that she might appear in The Apprentice, so she was keen on that, but that never came to pass, and it all ended with a phone call in 2007 until the main event, the event that's brought us here, the payoff, the hush money payment before the 2016 election, which is what this is about, the payment and the false accounting of that payment.
Yeah, James, as you say, quite something. Do we have any sense of how Donald Trump reacted to all of this?
We do, because people who are in court have reported on his demeanour. He appears to be very upset, as this excruciating detail is laid bare, particularly 2 episodes in particular. When the story was being relayed about him being spanked, he was heard to mutter an expletive, BS, he said quietly. And also, Stormy Daniels has said that he told her that he didn't sleep in the same bed as his wife, Melania. When she told that story, he was seen to shake his head. He also posted on social media during the lunch break, mistrial, calling for a mistrial. And indeed, his lawyers argued for that when they reconvened with the judge, saying that Stormy Daniels had gone too far in her evidence, that much of it was irrelevant. The judge listened to those arguments, but he rejected it, and we continue on. She's now being cross-examined.
Yeah, quite extraordinary developments. We are expecting, James, to also see and hear from Donald Trump in about 25 minutes' time.
If things go according to the way they normally do, Yalda, then yes, he is obviously a man who likes to speak on his way in and out of the courtroom. One does wonder what he has to say after a day of pretty devastating testimony, because bear in mind the politics of all of this, and you do have to wonder the salacious nature of everything. A man who, he denies the affair, remember, but he's a man accused of having this affair while he was married. You have to wonder how that plays into his election campaign with the key demographics, suburban women, evangelicals, the kind of areas, the territory where he needs to win votes, constituencies that have backed him in the past and were critical for him in 2016. So very serious and very depressing for him inside the courtroom, but wide-ranging implications outside too.
Well, James, we will be talking to you again a little later in the programme to get an update. Thank you so much. OK, we've got some breaking news that's just come in the last few minutes. We understand there are huge queues that are building up at UK airports because of a nationwide issue affecting passengers coming into the country. Now, these pictures are from Heathrow, but Manchester Airport says the UK border system is down as part of a nationwide outage. We've seen images and videos from other airports too, including Stansted and Gatwick. Plus these pictures from Heathrow where passengers say they've been waiting with no access to water or toilet facilities. In the past few minutes, a Heathrow spokesperson has said Border Force is currently experiencing a nationwide issue which is impacting passengers being processed through the border. Our teams are supporting Border Force with their contingency plans to help resolve the problem as quickly as possible and are on hand to provide passenger welfare. We apologise for any impact this is having to passenger journeys. And Manchester Airport says its resilience and customer service teams are working to assist passengers in the airport. But the images you're seeing there are huge queues that are building up at UK airports because of a nationwide issue that's affecting passengers that are coming into the country. We will be following that story very closely. Now back to our lead story in the Middle East. Israeli officials are on their way to Cairo to resume talks on a potential ceasefire after rejecting the latest proposal outlined by Egyptian and Qatari mediators. Now, the images that you're looking at right now were the scenes on the streets of Rafah yesterday as news filtered through that Hamas had accepted that very same proposal. It's a frustrating situation for those who only wish to be reunited with their loved ones. I'm joined now by Gil Dickman, whose cousin is believed to be held captive in Gaza. Gil's aunt, Kinneret, was killed when Hamas stormed Kibbutz Be'eri on October the 7th. Gil, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. I mean, it's been such a difficult 7 months for the families of these hostages. Just tell us about your feelings and thoughts on how things have developed over the last 24 hours.
Well, it's a roller coaster, and we've had such a roller coaster for the last 7 months. But in the last 24 hours, we've heard that Hamas said yes to the proposal, and then we've heard that it actually gave a proposal of its own. and that Israel has said no, and then that Israel is going into negotiations about the proposal. We are trying to shut off all that news because so much of it is psychological terror, and so much of it is given to us from the very terror organization that killed our loved ones and still holds our loved ones. We try to focus on what matters, and what matters is that there is actually a deal that could be reached between the two sides, that's for sure. And the White House has said that in the last few hours. There's a reachable deal that can bring an end to this tragedy, that can bring a ceasefire, and of course, bring the hostages back home. We feel that the world has forgotten about some of these hostages, but there are still women, innocent women, still two babies being held by this horrible terror organization, and men and women of all ages. We're waiting for them to come home, and I still think that this is possible.
We are going to be on the programme speaking to an Israeli government official. What would you say to him? Of course, I understand your feelings towards Hamas, but the fact that the Netanyahu government has said, look, regardless of whatever deal is on the table, we are going to go into Rafah. What would you say to Israeli government officials tonight?
Well, I've been demonstrating in the last few days, and I've been very vocal about it inside Israel. And I can say it also here that we are frightened of the activity in Rafah. We are what we think about is the risk that this could pose to our loved ones and for all the hostages, and that it could risk the deal. And what we heard is that the prime minister and other officials in Israel saying during the last Saturday that they would go into Rafah anyway, regardless of whether there is a deal or not. It looks like this put the negotiations at risk, and maybe even brought a different answer from Hamas. And what I expect them to do is to put anything and everything aside, not to think about politics and not to think about their own political future, but only about the lives of the hostages, the lives of the Israeli people that they were left alone on October 7th, and right now feel when they see and when they watch the news, if they get the news there in the tunnels of Gaza, that they've been abandoned again. They must know, and we must know, that the Israeli government is doing whatever they can, whatever is possible to get a deal that will bring them back home. I know that this is possible, and I want to hear them and see them doing all the things that they need to do to make sure that this deal is reachable, is being reached, and as quickly as possible, because time is running out. That hostages that we know that were alive, just a few, just on the 50th or the 60th day, are now dead, and they were murdered by Hamas. Some of them were killed by the IDF fire. We have to make sure that this deal is being reached as quickly as possible before they're going to get hurt.
Gil, we're so grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, Gil was talking there about the hostages and the situation for all of those hostage families desperately waiting for some news. But let's just focus on the situation in Gaza now. The Israeli military now has complete control over the Gaza side of the Rafah border crossing with Egypt. This evening, Hamas has warned Israel that there will be no ceasefire deal if it continues its operations in Rafah, which is exactly what Gil said that he and his family and all the other hostage families fear. Our international correspondent, John Sparks, reports from Jerusalem.
They weren't going to wait for an invitation. These are Israeli tanks, decked with flags, muscling their way into southern Gaza. A powerful symbol of Israeli intent in an area still under Hamas control. The seizure of the Rafah crossing was described as a limited counter-terrorism operation. But it may prove far larger than that. Israel's prime minister says he won't stop until Hamas is destroyed.
Seizing the crossing in Rafah is a very important step on the way to destroying the remaining military capabilities of Hamas, including the destruction of the 4 terrorist battalions.
Military pressure works, the dominant view taking hold in Netanyahu's cabinet. Here, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant visits units deployed near Rafah, and he pledged to deepen the operation all over the Strip. But it only fuels anxiety here. Museum Square in Tel Aviv, which has been turned into a commemoration center for 132 captives still held by Hamas. Most people here want Netanyahu to make a deal, an agreement to get the hostages out.
What I can say is we must take what we can get and start a deal.
Take a deal.
To take a deal, yeah.
This is Yehuda Cohen. His 19-year-old son, Nimrod, has been held prisoner for the past 7 months.
So we know he was taken alive and he got there alive, and we hope he's still alive.
Mr. Cohen is frustrated, like the family members of other hostages. There's a ceasefire proposal on the table that's been agreed by Hamas, and he thinks the government is stalling.
I met yesterday with the Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, and I asked him, is the government agreeing of a total ceasefire for releasing of the hostages, of all the hostages? I didn't get a direct answer. I asked the same question a few weeks ago, face-to-face to Netanyahu. I didn't get an answer.
31-year-old Doron Steinbrecher was taken by Hamas from her home at a kibbutz. The only proof of her abduction, a solitary message on WhatsApp. They've arrived. They have me, she wrote.
Like you can see, she's young and beautiful. And
this picture was taken...
Yeah, it's taken the time some weeks before they take her.
Her mother, Simona, thinks of little else. Doron was her baby, the youngest of 3 kids. There must be a voice in your head that is saying, take the deal. Take a deal, take the deal, any deal.
Not only me, all the other family of the hostages say that take it, make the deal, because we must begin to take the hostages out. And we can't do it alone.
The fear of war is widely felt. This is Al-Mawasi, the so-called humanitarian area where the Israelis ordered some residents in Rafah to evacuate. It's woefully inadequate, say the aid agencies. A humanitarian nightmare, says the UN. It seems there's nowhere left to hide from this calamity. John Sparks, Sky News, Tel Aviv.
Okay, let's look now at actually what's going on inside Gaza. Now, around 1.4 million people are sheltering in Rafah. Many of them have been instructed to move to the coastal area of Al-Mawasi, which the IDF has designated as a humanitarian safe zone. Well, with me now in the studio tonight is Wafa Shamalach, who has a number of family members inside the city of Rafah. Wafa, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Just tell us, you have your sister and her family, the children are all in Rafah. When did you last speak to them, and what are they saying?
This morning they were evacuating from Rafah to Al-Mawasi area in Khan Yunis.
What are they saying about the situation on the ground at the moment?
They were shocked by the news yesterday. Just yesterday, they were celebrating that Hamas had agreed on the deal, and like many Gazans family, they were celebrating, thinking about going back to their homes, which is not there anymore, but at least to go check on the place where they were. But unfortunately, the news today and the invasion of the military action into Rafah today that put everything to the 0 point. Like the same concerns. They were evacuated to Rafah to seek safety for them and their kids. And now they had to move again, which this is the 5th time they had to move from a place to...
So they've moved 5 times?
Yes.
Where did they move from originally?
From Gaza City. My family lives in Sheikh Ajrin area, which is on the southwest of Gaza City. The whole area is completely destroyed. Our family house, my house, our relatives' houses, it's been all destroyed and flattened.
You've lost a number of family members as well.
7 months ago, on the 8th of October, I lost 10 members of my family on one go, my uncle and his whole family. And I actually lost 13 people of my immediate family in total, and more than 120 from my extended family.
And now your sister, her husband, the children are on the move. How many children are there with them?
4 children. I have another brother who they were all together with my sister, and he has 5 children with his wife. They had to move from Rafah Yebna camp, the place where the IDF classified as safe zone. Now they had to move again.
They've moved, or they're moving to Al-Mawasi, which
they did move this morning,
they've did, and they were told that that would be a safe zone. Where are they living? What are they eating?
Just yesterday they were living in Rafah.
But in terms of, do they have a tent in Al-Mawasi? What do they have in terms of
They
supplies?
had to build up a tent using like woods and fabrics just to make a basic shelter for them, because it was unplanned. They thought that a ceasefire deal will be like soon, so we didn't thought that they had to move again from Rafah. So this morning, my brother-in-law and my brother, they had to build up a tent, a basic tent, just using woods and fabric.
What are they saying about what may happen next? Do they have no idea what is going to happen?
They are scared. They lost hope. Just yesterday, they were very optimistic and celebrating, and they thought, yeah, we are going back home. This nonsense will stop, and their children's life will be saved. But today, they lost every little hope. Nothing left now. What the IDF classified as a safe zone, now it's not a safe zone anymore. And even in Mawasi, it's not. There is no safe place in Gaza, basically.
And we know that Rafah border crossing, where the aid was coming through, is closed. Where are they getting food supplies from?
From the Rafah crossing is the main and the only artery for Gaza to pass the humanitarian aid and for people to pass. But the main risk actually of the military action to Rafah today and the closure of the Rafah crossing, that means that neither people will be allowed, people who are like critically sick or injured, they cannot move to safety and seek medical attention, and nor the humanitarian aid will be passed to Gaza, and whatever left now in Rafah from food or aids in general, the prices will be skyrocketed.
Wafa, we're really grateful that you've joined us and shared your family story with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, as we've been hearing, one of the main concerns has been the flow of aid to Palestinians in Gaza. The 2 main crossings at Rafah and at Kerem Shalom are now closed, the latter after a Hamas attack on Sunday. Well, I'm joined now by the Israeli government spokesperson, Avi Hyman. Mr. Hyman, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. We've spoken with someone from a hostage family. We've also spoken to someone who has family members stuck in Rafah. The point that our last guest just made was her family members, like so many others in Gaza, have been told to move multiple times, eventually told to go to Rafah where it would be safe. You're now asking them to leave again because of another operation that's been launched. Just your response to that.
Yalda, thank you so much for having me on. I'm sorry I missed you when you were in Israel. This is an awful situation. It's an awful situation that we didn't choose, that we didn't want, but we have to continue with. We have to go after the last 4 battalions of Hamas that are holed up in Rafah. I myself am the son of a refugee. My heart goes out to her family and all those families, the civilians caught up in this awful war that Hamas started. But we owe it to the people of Israel and to the people of Gaza to ensure that Hamas no longer controls Gaza.
Well, what we're hearing over and over again, Avi, from the people of Israel, certainly from Gil Dickman, who just spoke to us, and like so many other hostage families, they're saying a ceasefire proposal was put on the table. Their government denied them the chance to be reunited with their family members.
So obviously, I can't fathom the pain that the hostage families are going through. I've got my own friend, Rabbi Doron Peret's son, Daniel, is being held. He was killed on October 7th and is being held. I understand the pain, and every single Israeli wants nothing more than to see those hostages reunited with their family. Unfortunately, once again, Hamas is playing games. We saw they went out to the international press yesterday and said, we've accepted a deal. Well, what deal have you accepted? It's not a deal that's anywhere close to our very basic requirements. For example, they're demanding the end to the war. We can't end the war. We've made it very clear from day one.
I mean, are these battalions more important right now for you than the hostages being released? Because obviously an operation in Rafah will also put the hostages who have been kept there. We know a number of them have died. We saw the hostages who were waving white flags that were killed by the IDF themselves. This will further endanger those hostages as well.
Yalda, I would argue the opposite of that, actually, because we have a historic precedent. We already have had about half the hostages come home. And the reason that they came home, from our assessment, is twofold, is the military pressure that was put on Hamas to the extent that they had to accept a diplomatic deal. So we will plow forward and go after the last 4 battalions because we have to. I mean, the Prime Minister said, with or without a deal, we have to ensure that Hamas doesn't control Gaza, not politically, not militarily.
And Avi, I mean, we've been aware of that. I mean, your allies, your closest allies have said they don't agree with the Rafah operation. The US president 2 months ago said it was a red line. Just in the last 24 hours, France has reiterated their strongest opposition to this offensive. They've said that the forced displacement of a civilian population constitutes a war crime under international law.
No, I mean, I'm not sure what people are asking us to do. Are they asking us to leave the civilians where they are so that Hamas can use them as human shields? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I mean,
Hamas has spent the last 16 years embedding themselves.
1.4 million people are crammed into Rafah because the IDF asked them to move there because it would be a safe zone. UNICEF is saying that there is nowhere safe for anyone to go in Gaza, and 600,000 children of Rafah are at risk. They say hundreds of thousands of children in Rafah have been injured, sick, malnourished, traumatized, or living with a disability, and that children should not be asked to move again.
So essentially what a UN organization is saying is that Hamas should be allowed to use human shields. They're empowering them to use human shields. And that's not something that we can stand for. We're asking people, as we've already done throughout the war, to get out of harm's way in a way that other armies do not do, and so they could be safe, because our fight is with Hamas, not the people of Gaza.
34,000 people dead. And I know you'll say that it's Hamas's numbers, but they're the numbers now that the US president is using. They're the numbers that your staunchest and closest of allies are using. Whatever you say, Avi, this is what it looks like now, that there's 1.4 million people pushed into Rafah. 34,000 people have been left dead as a result of this war. And you may or may not say, look, it's 8,000 or 10,000 or 13,000 Hamas fighters have been killed, but the leadership has not been eliminated. And now, for the sake of a handful of battalions, you're putting the lives of more Israeli hostages who were let down on October the 7th because of the Israeli security failure, are now at risk again because of this operation.
Yalda, you and I know that Hamas wants to do October 7th again and again and again. We know that because they've said it, and they mean it. And that means that we need to ensure that they don't control Gaza, that not militarily and not politically. And we need to build a better future for the people of Gaza and for the people of Israel, which we can only do once that genocidal terrorist organization is taken down. That's what we have to do. And we also have to bring home the hostages. Now, whether we do that militarily or whether we do that with a carrot or a stick, or whether we do that with using diplomatic channels, we will bring home the hostages. We will destroy Hamas, and we will ensure that Gaza doesn't pose a threat to us anymore.
We continue to hear this phrase, total victory. But we also hear mixed messages where Israeli spokespeople have also said they understand that Hamas won't be fully eliminated. Is that the case, that it's unlikely that Hamas will be fully eliminated from Gaza, and it's just these battalions you're going after?
So the Prime Minister's made it clear on a number of occasions that what we need to do is to smash the battalions, smash them in a way that they're not operationally active. They can't operate as a military, which is what they do now. Hamas cannot be in control politically or militarily of Gaza. Now, if you're asking me, can we kill an idea, which I'm often asked, obviously, no, you can't kill an idea. I'm sure there's still people in London with ISIS flags up on their bedroom, but ISIS doesn't control the territory.
And there are now thousands of orphans and a built-up resentment because of this level of the operations that have been launched on the Palestinian people for 7 months. And you don't think that is feeding into Hamas's ideology and this resentment towards Israel?
Well, again, there are people with Nazi flags up in London. There are people that march saying they have the Nazi philosophy, but Germany is no longer run by the Nazis. That's the difference. ISIS is the same thing. So what we will need to do after the war, as the Prime Minister has said, is to demilitarize Gaza and de-radicalize Gaza. While I would read my kids The Hungry Caterpillar, they're reading about martyrs that killed Jews, innocent Jews in cold blood. And these are books that come with a stamp of approval from the Palestinian Ministry of Education. So we need to seriously de-radicalize in the same way that was done in Nazi Germany. We need to build a better future for our children and for their children. But first, Hamas needs to be destroyed and the hostages need to come home.
Avi Hyman, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Okay, just a reminder now of our breaking news this hour. Huge queues are building up at the UK's major airports because of a nationwide issue affecting passengers who are coming into the country. Now, Manchester Airport says the UK border system is down as part of that nationwide outage. We've seen images and videos from other airports as well, including Stansted, Gatwick and Heathrow. Let's just show you these pictures from Heathrow, where passengers say they've been waiting with no access to water or toilet facilities. A Heathrow spokesperson has said that the Border Force is currently experiencing a nationwide issue which is impacting passengers being processed through the border. Our teams are supporting Border Force with their contingency plans to help resolve the problem as quickly as possible and are on hand to provide passenger welfare. We apologise for any impact this is having to passenger journeys. So you can see the huge queues there at Heathrow Airport. And Stansted Airport has said their operational and customer service staff are supporting passengers while UK Border Force and the Home Office fix the issue. Manchester Airport also says its resilience and customer service teams are working to assist passengers in the airport there. So that's our breaking news story this evening. Now, Russia. Let's go to Russia. And Russia is purely democratic. That's what the Kremlin's chief spokesperson told our Moscow correspondent Ivor Bennett today as Vladimir Putin was sworn in for a 5th term. The event felt more like a coronation than an inauguration. It was never going to be low-key, of course, held inside gilded throne room of the Tsars, which was dripping with gold. And the president's address had all the hallmarks of a Putin speech, talking up Russia's greatness and blaming the West for Moscow's isolation. Ivor has this report.
To call it an inauguration might feel misleading. After all, this was not his first time. It's the start of Putin 5.0. The Kremlin choreography is all part of the routine now for Russia's leader, almost more ritual than political process.
Уважаемый Владимир Владимирович, прошу вас принести присягу.
After swearing an oath of allegiance to the Russian people, there was a promise to protect them, ominous words for the West.
You, the citizens of Russia, have confirmed that our country is on the right course. This is of great importance right now as we face serious challenges. I see this as unwavering resolve to defend our choices, our values, our freedom, and Russia's national interests.
The symbolism here is key. Held inside the throne room of the Tsars, this was a projection of power. Among the audience were pop stars, sports stars and religious leaders, even a former Hollywood action hero.
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid. Yeah, sorry.
Why is it a stupid question? It's just an open question.
I think it's pretty stupid, and I think you know the answer.
But others were more willing to talk.
Western leaders and Western governments say Vladimir Putin has turned Russia into a dictatorship. Why do you think that's not the case?
This is not the case, absolutely. Absolutely, it's just propaganda. It's a rough propaganda, nothing else.
But is it democratic that there isn't really any opposition to speak of in Russia?
But there is opposition inside the country. Well, of course, the conditions are much more tougher right now because we are in a war conditions.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin, having been in power for nearly 2.5 decades. At the end of this next term, in 2030, there'll only be one person ahead of him, and that's her, Catherine the Great. The question is, what will a 5th Putin term mean for Russia and the world? His last term saw the invasion of Ukraine and a crackdown on dissent at home. Some believe he won't stop there.
This is a one-track movement toward more authoritarian, or I would say half-totalitarian, a hybrid totalitarian regime. He made Russians his hostages, but at the same time he's hostage of himself.
After so long in power, there's certainly no sign of him changing his tune now. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, Moscow.
Well, as one president was sworn in, another's safety was brought into question. Ukraine's security service today revealing an undercover plot to kill Volodymyr Zelensky. Ukraine's leader is often open and honest when it comes to his well-being, previously admitting there have been at least 10 known attempts on his life since Russia's invasion. Well, let's go to our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, who joins us live from Ukraine. And Deborah, in a lot of detail emerging here about this this plot to kill Volodymyr Zelensky.
Yes, quite alarming and elaborate, and also, if confirmed, these charges really quite alarming in terms of evidence of potential infiltration by the Russian security services into the heart of Ukraine's security apparatus, because the two colonels who've been arrested linked with this assassination plot are two Ukrainian colonels, part of a protection guard that is sworn to protect senior officials. And so fairly shocking that these two individuals, according to Ukraine's security service, were turned by the Russian intelligence services before the full-scale invasion that Vladimir Putin launched back in February 2022. Now, in terms of the actual details of this assassination plot, this group, they're allegedly part of a network run from Moscow, intent upon recruiting someone close to the president's own security detail to kidnap and then kill him. And two other senior officials were also named as targets in this conspiracy. They were the very head of the SBU that's unveiled this plot or revealed this plot, and also the head of Ukraine's military intelligence service. And this senior general, Kirill Budanov, who's often speaking out against the Kremlin, the allegation is that the intention was to kill him before the Orthodox Easter, which took place this year on the 5th of May. The head of the SBU said it was designed to be the ultimate inauguration present for President Putin. Clearly, that hasn't happened because this alleged plot has been busted. But pretty shocking if these allegations are confirmed.
As you say, shocking and quite alarming. Deborah, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. Now, tonight we're talking about the growing threats facing our world, and we couldn't explore the idea of global security without looking at China. Yesterday, Sky News' deputy political editor Sam Coates exclusively revealed the cyber attack on the Ministry of Defence. Ministers believe China is to blame, but did not name the malign actor in public. And at the same time, President Macron rolled out the red carpet for President Xi Jinping. Mr. Macron has been criticised for what's being described as more than friendly welcome. One French politician accusing him of flattering tyrants. So why is a relationship with China so important? Have a listen. The UK Ministry of Defence hacked by China. It's the latest in a string of cyber attacks where the finger has been pointed at Beijing. China has firmly denied the allegations.
Remarks from UK politicians are absurd. China firmly opposes and fights all forms of cyber attacks.
It's all part of a global picture, and Europe's catching on.
We need to take the powers which we have done to protect ourselves against the risk that China and other countries pose to us.
So how has China now become a global security problem for the West? First, let's wind the clock back 10 years to a moment of closeness between China and Europe.
So this visit marks the start of a new era. Some have called it a golden era.
Geopolitical rivalry began to intensify in the late Obama years, but accelerated under the Trump administration. Trade wars, cyber and military buildup, standoffs in the South China Sea, and worsening rhetoric.
China! They're draining us, they're taking our money, they're rebuilding themselves.
This hostility has continued under the Biden administration. Chinese espionage has also stepped up. Last year, it reached an apex when a Chinese spy balloon was shot down in US airspace. The latest hack is just another moment of this deterioration between China and the West. So who have China got their sights on now in Europe? President Xi's visit to Serbia and Hungary is part of Beijing's move toward a different kind of foreign policy, aligning with two countries that remain suspicious of the West and the West suspicious of them. And the timing, symbolic. Russia's Vladimir Putin sworn in for a historic fifth term, his relationship with China continuing to strengthen. And now Europe is finally waking up to the threat from the East. But what could any fight back look like? I'm joined now by Charles Kupchan, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and former national security expert in both the Obama and Clinton administrations. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program, Charles. Would it be fair to say that on this trip, the first one that Xi Jinping has made to Europe in 5 years, it's a sort of almost a policy of divide and conquer the West?
I think that's right. And I think that
she is really motivated by a desire to try to pull France, and along with it, the European Union, away from the United States, in some ways tapping into President Emmanuel Macron's calls for greater strategic autonomy. He said not long ago that France and Europe need to make sure that they're not vassals of the United States. And so I think that she is trying to play into that narrative, what you might call a return to a French Gaullist position of standing on its own 2 feet. And then he's going to Hungary and to Serbia, in part because they are a lower hanging fruit. They are more pro-Russian. Again, an effort to peel possibly members away from alignment with the United States.
I guess, Charles, as you say, he's on his way to Serbia and Hungary, which sort of, it almost feels like he's holding a sign up to say, we, China, want to split you up. There feels like there should be more nuance when a superpower is trying to sort of, play these sorts of games.
Well, nuance is not exactly China's strong suit. They've been overplaying their hand now for quite some time, which is why their neighbors, the South Koreans, the Japanese, the Taiwanese, the Filipinos, the Australians, are all tightening their alliance relationship with the United States. I think Beijing is overdoing it. And frankly, I think she's going to have a tough time trying to pull Europe in China's direction. Why? Because Russia is the key here. Russia has invaded Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is of existential importance to Europeans. Who is supporting Russia? China. And so in that sense, I think Xi is really going to not make much progress in weaning Europe away from its tight alliance with the United States as long as he continues to support Vladimir Putin.
I guess the question is, the United States has been clear on Ukraine, Europe, we stand with you. The question then is, on China, does Europe stand with the United States?
I think there's more distance on China than there is on Ukraine. I mean, setting aside Donald Trump and whether he's the next president, I would say President Biden is very much in lockstep with Europe's mainstream. On China, things are a bit more complicated, in part because the Germans in particular are heavily commercially tied to China. They sell a lot of cars to the Chinese. They produce VWs, BMWs in China. They don't want a decoupling. And secondly, the United States has much more geopolitical skin in the game. It's the country that is defending Taiwan. It's the one with aircraft carriers in the Pacific. The Europeans, they don't have that much at stake when it comes to geopolitics. And I think in many respects, what Macron is trying to do is carve out some middle space where he's not forced to choose between the United States and China. Many countries around the world don't want to make that choice.
I guess when you see the sort of hacking that we saw today here on the Ministry of Defense, and then when we see industrial sort of espionage by the Chinese as well, it is a wake-up call for the Europeans, isn't it? They suddenly sort of realize, okay, this is a global security threat, not just a, your problem, America.
Yeah, had you and I, Yalda, been talking a few years ago, I would have said the gap between the U.S. and Europe on China is huge. Now it's much less gaping. Why? Because of COVID, because of what's called, wolf warrior diplomacy by the Chinese. And now we hear on an almost daily basis that the Chinese are hacking here, they're hacking there, they're putting malware in various critical utilities infrastructure. So I think there has been a wisening in Europe about the threat posed by the Chinese. And despite these differences when it comes to trade with China and geopolitics, the broad picture is that the United States and Europe more or less see eye to eye when it comes to pushing back against China's aggressive behavior.
Charles, really fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Well, let's return now to New York, where Stormy Daniels has taken to the stand in Donald Trump's hush money trial in court. The adult film star described her alleged one-night stand with the former president, an encounter Mr. Trump has described as 100% made up. Here's what the former president said as he left court today.
What do you think of Stormy's testimony?
So this was, thank you very much. Thank you.
So revealing today. Should there still be a mistrial?
Why is the case a disaster?
What do you think of Stormy's testimony?
So this was a very big day, a very revealing day. As you see, their case is totally falling apart. They have nothing on books and records, and even something that should bear very little relationship to the case. It's just a disaster for the DA, for the Soros-backed DA. It's a disaster. This whole case is just a disaster. If you read the legal scholars, you'll see, because they're writing about it, they've never seen anything quite like it. And neither have I. I should be out campaigning right now. We're leading in all the polls. I'd like to be campaigning. We'll be leading by a lot more. But I just want to appreciate the job you're doing. It's not easy standing there all day waiting, but you're hearing the same things that we're hearing. On another matter, as you know, it's Biden's backers that seem to be funding what's going on with the Palestinians. They're probably not Palestinians, they're agitators, bad agitators, really bad. And I think our government ought to find out who they are, where they're from, and treat them the same way as they do the J6 hostages. You got to treat them the same way. These are agitators. They're really hurting our country. It's happening all over the country in cities. So what happened last
Okay, you're listening there to Donald Trump, who's left court after Stormy Daniels testified. Let's bring in our James Matthews to give us a little bit more analysis. And James, I mean, that was classic sort of Trump dismissing what Stormy Daniels said and then going into some kind of campaign mode.
Yeah, Donald Trump, the man who would be president again. I think looking at that, the difficulty people will have is not seeing a Donald Trump in satin pajamas, reclining on a bed in T-shirt and boxer shorts, posing with one leg raised. That's the evidence that came out of the witness box from Stormy Daniels today. His credibility has to be dented by that. I mean, it was a day in which the Donald was diminished by stories of having dinner with this porn star, about the sex that they had, how she was shaking, bewildered. He said to her as they parted, "Let's get together again, honey bunch." So that's what it was all about in there today. He is accentuating what is good for his case, his defense case, and in cross-examination, she did wilt rather. Stormy Daniels admitted that she owed Donald Trump more than $500,000 from a previous in legal expenses from a previous defamation case, admitted that she had concealed information that should have gone onto a court form. So Team Trump are quite happy with what they've done with the witness today, exposed her as a liar to some degree, undermined her credibility. But it must be borne in mind that Stormy Daniels, in any case, yes, a headline act in all of this, but a bit part player, a big bit part player, but it's all about the $130,000 and how that was falsified through the accounts, the money that she was given, and it was then falsified in the accounts. And the prosecutors will be content that they have laid a hard accountancy trail to do with that, quite apart from what we've heard from Stormy Daniels, good or bad for prosecution or defense case.
Yeah, and James, at one point, Trump did ask the judge for a mistrial.
Yeah, their argument was that she had gone too far, that she was asked questions and simply had too much to say about too much that to their mind was irrelevant. And, it was detailed, it was excruciating. it did humiliate Donald Trump, and they said it had nothing to do with the case. Therefore, this should be declared a mistrial. It's not surprising that they took that move. It wouldn't be the first time across several court cases that Donald Trump's lawyers have called for a mistrial and called for the whole thing to be thrown out. In the event, Judge Merchan, he said, no, we're going to continue. He rejected that appeal, and so the trial goes on. We're still on witness number 13. Cross-examination will continue for another day, Yalda. That'll be on Thursday, because Wednesday is a day off in the New York court system.
James, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. Let's just go back to our breaking news now this evening. And huge queues, as we've been reporting, are building up at the UK's major airports because of a nationwide issue affecting passengers coming into the country. Let's go straight to our Sadia Chowdhury, who joins us from Heathrow. And Sadia, give us a sense of what's going on out there.
Well, look, we know very little about what caused this issue, but what we do know is that it is something to do with the border force systems. And at least one airport has referenced the E-gates as being the one with the problems. And you can see from some of the footage we've been playing tonight, that just the impact that this is having on people entering the country. Huge queues at Gatwick, Heathrow Airport, where I am, Manchester and Stansted, and no signs of when this might be resolved. The airport's saying that they're using staff to try and help with the passenger welfare, but we've still not heard from Border Force, who haven't confirmed it, but we have had those issues confirmed now by a number of airports who say that this is a problem with the E-gates at Border Force.
Yeah, and we've had various different spokespeople sort of comment on the support they're providing for people there. But Sadia, thank you very much for bringing us up to date. A busy programme tonight. Thank you very much for watching. The news at 10 next. Good night for now.